The lifeblood of any wrestling promotion are the stars of the future. After all, the current crop will only be able to go on for so long, and sooner or later they're going to have to be replaced with some fresh faces. Luckily then, there are a lot of promising young talent out there right now. But who are the most promising of them all? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. So join us as we take a deep dive into Next Big Things, wrestling's stars of tomorrow. And if we're going to start anywhere, it only makes sense to do so with a man who many people believe will be a future face of WWE, and that's none other than Bron Breakker. Yes, ever since making his NXT debut in 2021, Bronson Steiner has proven himself to be something of a prodigy, a man who can carry himself in the ring like someone who's been doing this for years and not since 2020. Of course, it does help that there's a natural aptitude for wrestling in his blood, as his father is none other than Rick Steiner, and with him looking just like his dad and sounding just like his Uncle Scott, it's easy to see why NXT fans have taken to him so much then. But it's not just those few faithful in Orlando who've gotten behind the Georgia native, as WWE top brass are apparently high on him too. And that's why, during his time on the developmental brand so far, he's become a two-time NXT World Champion. Hell, when it came to winning that title the first time, he even had to beat a true ring general in the form of Tommaso Ciampa. So, if it wasn't clear before, it was after, that Bron was someone not to be taken lightly. And sure, his real test will come when he moves up to the main roster, as there, he'll be exposed to a larger audience and get to mix it up with even bigger stars like Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes. But given what we've seen of him so far, we don't imagine he'll have much trouble doing so. No, we wouldn't be surprised to see him win some gold on Raw or SmackDown soon enough, in fact, possibly even before the year is out. That's right, it's hard to look at Bron Breakker and not see a man with a bright future ahead of him, which is exactly why readers of Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletter voted him the Rookie of the Year in 2022. And with 2023 seeing a whole new side to the 25-year-old emerge in the form of a heel turn, this year has the potential to be an even bigger one for the son of one of the most legendary tag team acts in all of wrestling. But he's not the only person on NXT 2.0 with a bright future ahead of him. In fact, he's not even the only person in his family, because his real-life girlfriend is also showing herself to be a star of that brand's women's division at the moment. Who are we talking about here? Why, Cora Jade, of course. Yes, even if she's only 22, there's no sense that this Chicago native is undeserving of the spot she's in, because as it stands right now, she's a highlight of the NXT women's roster. But then she's always been one to watch as far back as 2018 when she first got her start in the business working indies around the Chicagoland area. Hell, at one point, this even saw her get tryouts with both Impact and AEW, with these appearances giving her enough TV experience to the point where, once she was signed up with WWE in January of 2021, she felt like a natural already. Sure, these initial months would see her play more of a babyface, someone who, with her trademark skateboard, was portrayed as a woman who young girls in the audience could get behind. That said, like with her real-life boyfriend, a change of character has recently seen her shift over to the heel side of the equation, with this only serving to add more layers to her character. And with those extra layers to work with, her confidence and her skills have been able to visibly grow each and every week, to the point where it now seems like an inevitability that she'll be on the main roster before long. After all, as a former NXT Women's Tag Team Champion and someone who's pinned most of the top stars there at some point or another, she's done just about everything she can do on the developmental brand outside of winning the Women's World title. But given how main roster ready she is already, she probably doesn't need that belt at this point, as there are far greater prizes awaiting her on either Raw or SmackDown in the near future. That said, for as much as Cora Jade has already achieved, and for as great as she's been in Orlando, she's arguably being outshone by someone who, at the tender young age of 21, is such a prodigy at this, it's actually her nickname, and that's Roxanne Perez. Really, this entry should have been obvious to anyone who's had a passing interest in wrestling over the past couple of years, because in a very short space of time, Perez has proven herself to be a modern-day version of her idol AJ Lee. Someone who has all the skills to become a hit with adult fans, all while having the charm and charisma required to get over with young girls too. And these qualities have been evident ever since her days training at Booker T's Reality of Wrestling School in 2017, back when she was just still 16 years old. So much were they obvious here, in fact, that it was at this point Booker took to labeling her the prodigy and deemed her his own pet project. so it must have delighted the 5-time WCW champion when in April of 2021, while working under her original ring name of Roxanne, Perez became the inaugural Ring of Honor Women's Champion. Then it must have delighted him even more when, after holding on to this belt until January the following year, the Texas native was signed up to a contract with WWE and immediately sent over to the NXT brand, where she'd once again get to work alongside her mentor every week. Of course, you all know what happened next. Roxanne quickly became a hit with fans after scoring big wins over the likes of Tiffany Stratton and Jacy Jayne. Then, once that was done, alongside her former friend Cora Jade, she won the NXT Women's Tag Team titles. But this was only the beginning as it happened, because following on from there, she'd make cameo appearances on both SmackDown and the 2023 Women's Royal Rumble, all before returning to 2.0 to defeat Mandy Rose and in the process become NXT Women's Champion. Sadly though, since that point her title reign has come to an untimely end. But this doesn't mean that she's down and out. No, it likely means she's being prepared for a full-time main roster run instead, one which should see her fill the hole left by AJ all those years ago and become the fan favorite everyone wants to see reach the top of the mountain. Back over to the men's side of the equation, however, our next subject isn't exactly someone who fans are likely to take as a babyface. And that's because with him basically being a younger version of The Miz, you can expect huge levels of heat for Grayson Waller everywhere he goes. Need any evidence of this? Just look at the way fans have reacted to him on NXT 2.0, as with his excellent douchebag character, he's been able to get under people's skin with ease. And this has helped the Australian to find large levels of success on the developmental brand in a relatively short space of time. Sure, it wasn't like he didn't know what he was doing before this, as prior to signing with WWE in 2021, he was a well-known figure on both the Australian and American indie circuit. So perhaps it shouldn't be surprising that he's been as effective as he has at doing what he does. And with him being one of the older people on this list at 33, he's certainly got some more life experience to draw from than most, which is just another reason why WWE shouldn't waste any time with him, and they should get him up to the main roster as soon as possible. After all, while he may not have won any gold on the developmental brand yet, he's shown in feuds against the likes of AJ Styles, LA Knight, and Apollo Crews, and he's even managed to win the first ever Iron Survivor match in 2022 on top of this. Hell, when he was given the task of going up against our next subject, he also managed to put on one of the best matches this iteration of the developmental brand has seen to date. And with that match having the added spotlight of it being for the North American Championship, it only served as yet another feather in his cap. But who was the man Grayson Waller was facing that night at July 2022's The Great American Bash? Why, it was the only man who could really challenge Braun Breaker for the spot of Ace of 2.0, and that's Carmelo Hayes. What a great wrestler this guy is, seriously. While NXT 2.0 may have been criticized when it first began for having a lot of people who weren't TV ready yet, that criticism could never be applied to the Massachusetts native, as from day one, it's been clear he's a star. That said, it wasn't like this happened overnight for him. No, the 28-year-old has had to work hard to reach this level at such a young age, something he did by working all around the New England indie circuit between 2014 and 2021. Luckily then, it was in that latter year that this hard work all paid off for him, because after being signed to a developmental contract with WWE, he'd get shipped over to NXT just when it was rebranding into its current incarnation, with him there getting to show exactly what he could do to a far wider audience. So needless to say, with both fans and management quickly realizing how good he was, Hayes was fast-tracked to title success, as on October 12th of that same year, he'd defeat Isaiah Swerve Scott to become the NXT North American Champion. But that wouldn't be the end of his success story, because following on from this, he'd lose his title, win it back again, and then later add more hardware to his collection when he beat Roderick Strong to unify it with the NXT Cruiserweight title. Yes, it's rare that someone so early in their WWE run gets to hold two belts at once, but it just goes to show how much faith Carmelo Hayes' bosses have in his future. And if that wasn't evidence enough of how highly they valued him, since that point he's also gone on to end Braun Breaker's 362-day run with the NXT World title, and add a run with this to his list of accomplishments too. Where will the future take him from here? Probably the main roster sooner rather than later, if we're guessing. After all, he would fit in perfectly alongside other talented high flyers there, like Ricochet, Seth Rollins, and AJ Styles. And with his ability to win gold wherever he goes already being well documented, we wouldn't be surprised if it's ultimately someone like him who dethrones Gunther to take the Intercontinental title away for their own at some point. One person who most certainly won't be dethroning Gunther, however, is our next entry. Not because they don't have the skill, but because they work for a different company. That's right, it's time to shift gears for a while and head over to All Elite Wrestling, because there, one of the brightest stars of the future is currently sharpening his skills as a part of the Blackpool Combat Club. Who are we talking about this time? Why, Wheeler Yuda, of course. Sure, he might only be 26, but already this Philadelphia native has done more with his career than many others twice his age. After all, after spending 6 years cutting his teeth on the likes of Combat Zone Wrestling and Major League Wrestling between 2014 and 2020, he's managed to make the jump to the big leagues by wrestling for Ring of Honor and AEW. Yes, after initially joining Tony Khan's company as a member of the Best Friends, he's since let a more vicious side of himself out by allying with Jon Moxley, Bryan Danielson, and Claudio Castagnoli as the resident young boy of the BCC. And during his time learning from these three, he's been able to win some gold for the first time by becoming a 2-time Ring of Honor Pure Champion. Then, with this belt around his waist, he's gotten to prove he can go in the ring to another level altogether by having some excellent matches against performers such as Daniel Garcia and the "I can't believe he's wrestling again in 2023" strong style legend that is Katsuyori Shibata. So at this rate, we wouldn't be surprised if Wheeler has conquered the wrestling world before his time is out, perhaps by usurping the 4 pillars of AEW, MJF, Darby Allin, Jungle Boy, and Sammy Guevara, and becoming the real breakout face of the company in the future. That said, if he has intentions of doing so, he'll have to at some point overcome another fast-rising star down in Jacksonville, and that's the man who currently stands tall as the FTW champion, Hook. Sure, the FTW title isn't officially recognized by AEW and so technically doesn't count towards his record, but that hasn't stopped the New York native from wearing it with pride everywhere he's gone over the last year or so, as he's laid waste to everyone in his path. Of course, it hasn't always been this way for him, however, as upon debuting on Dynamite in December of 2020, Hook's gimmick was that he rarely got physical and never said a word. No, in a decision which turned him into a full-blown meme for a while, the 23-year-old would instead just stand on the sidelines looking like Peter Parker, eating chips and being impossibly cool in the process. Basically, you knew he was going to do something eventually, and when he did, it was going to be awesome. But in drawing the weight out for so long, his legend only grew that much more. So when he finally made his in-ring debut a year later in December of 2021, he was an instant superstar to fans watching, as in spite of all the irony surrounding his rise, he actually turned out to be pretty good, well beyond where someone his age and experience level should be at. And his abilities have only continued to grow as the months and years have carried on from there, because with his father Taz watching him from the commentary booth, Hook has defeated absolutely everyone he's come up against, whether that be Ethan Page, Matt Hardy, or even his former stablemate Ricky Starks. Really then, it's just a matter of time until he decides the FTW title isn't enough for him, and that instead he wants to go after some officially sanctioned gold. And when that day comes, the rest of the roster better be aware because, as Claude Monet Punk once learned on a notable Dark segment, when you send Hook, disaster is sure to follow for his target. But luckily, the WWE roster doesn't have to worry about dealing with his fury anytime soon, as he appears to be under a long-term contract with Tony Khan. Not that this means the corridors of New York can rest easy, however, as while the FTW champion may not be coming after them, someone who might soon be making even bigger waves there in the near future is Gable Stevenson. Why is Stevenson a man to be feared so much? Well, like Kurt Angle years ago, he's an Olympic gold medal winner in amateur wrestling. So if he even has a thimble full of the aptitude for this that Kurt had, it seems like a shoo-in he'll be a world beater in record time. That said, it's hard to say this for certain, because at the time of this video's recording, Stevenson is yet to even have his first match. But while we can't see his progress with our own eyes, we can at least go by the opinions of his trainers, who roundly seem to think he's taking to the sport like a duck to water. And this is probably why, during the 2021 draft, he was picked up by Raw despite not even having made his debut yet. Yes, aside from a couple of cameo appearances like when he showed up at WrestleMania 38 Night 2 to take down fellow Olympian Chad Gable with a suplex, the 22-year-old from Minnesota has largely remained a mystery to fans. but his abilities may not be a mystery for much longer, because with it seeming apparent he's going to skip NXT entirely, we wouldn't be surprised to see him dominating Monday nights before the year is out, even if he has recently expressed plans to continue on with his amateur career for a while too. Hell, if he does both simultaneously, we could be looking at the first world champion in both amateur and pro wrestling at the same time. And what a feat that would be, as even other folks like the aforementioned Angle and Gable, as well as Brock Lesnar, haven't been able to achieve such a thing. No, they were only able to succeed by doing one sport, then retiring from this and moving on to the next. So with that in mind, if Gable Stevenson can achieve such a goal, he could very well be the next face of WWE once Roman Reigns decides to hang up his boots. At the very least, he'll be a strong challenger for Braun Breaker in taking that spot. But that's the men's division, and over in the women's, the next face of the company following the era of Becky Lynch is far less obvious. Sure, we've already talked about two potential names who could fill this role in Cora Jade and Roxanne Perez, but they're not the only possibilities out there. No, there's another strong contender in Ava Rayne. And why is Ava Rayne such a strong contender for the future face of the division despite only having one televised match thus far? Well, because like with Braun Breaker, this is in her blood. That said, while Braun has the genes of one of the greatest tag teams of all time and the Steiner brothers behind him, even they pale in comparison to the success Rayne's dad has had, as he's none other than The Rock. Yes, the biggest movie star on the planet and one of the most legendary figures to ever step foot inside a wrestling ring, Dwayne Johnson's legacy doesn't need to be gone over here again in detail. The reason we bring him up at all, in fact, is because, being his daughter, Ava Rayne has been left with some huge shoes in his wake. Shoes which, based on her early work in NXT 2.0, she's going to work very hard at filling. Sure, it's still early days for her, so it's not easy to say where exactly she'll be in 5 years' time, but let's not forget that The Rock had a very rocky beginning, pun intended, and that his real star power didn't fully get unleashed until around late 1997. So if we're working on this timeline then, we can expect to see Rayne come into her own over the next year or so as she grows more and more confident in both her character and her abilities in the ring. And soon after that, we can expect to see her dominating the main roster, maybe by dethroning either Bianca Belair or Rhea Ripley as women's champion. Of course, even she's not the only woman on NXT 2.0 vying for the title of top future prospect, however, and that's because the last subject we're going to be looking at today has also been able to make a huge splash in a very short space of time with her athletic skills, and that's Sol Ruka. Now, if we're covering this topic a year ago, it's unlikely you would have seen the 23-year-old California native anywhere near our list of subjects. And that just goes to show how quickly she's risen up the ranks then, as despite only debuting in 2022, she's already a star in waiting. Why is this? Well, she's an incredible athlete for one, someone who clearly has some kind of background in gymnastics. And this background has served her well during matches against the likes of Tiffany Stratton, Zoe Stark, and Alba Fire. That said, given how young and relatively inexperienced she is, it may be a bit premature to expect her to reach the top of the main roster quite yet. No, the best thing for her is likely to remain down in NXT for a while, where she can continue to hone her craft. That way, when she does finally get her call up in a year or two's time, she'll be ready for the spotlight, as she'll have been able to get the experience necessary to carry herself like the star the company feels she can be. After that, who knows where her career will take her. Hopefully all the way to the top, as by the middle of the decade, the current crop of established women's stars will likely be starting to cycle themselves out. But then that's always been the way the wrestling business has worked, with the old periodically making way for the new. And with all the people we've discussed today representing just some of the new stars waiting to take their spot at the top, the future of the wrestling industry looks bright, maybe brighter than it ever has before.